just like to take a couple of minutes to set the scene. So surge capacity, why today, what we're going to be talking about. So I think a lot of this has come from COVID. So there's been an unprecedented strain on public services for the last sort of 18 months. There's been a significant challenge of managing surges in demand all over the place, whether it be normal staff moving over to COVID-specific roles and they're leaving work behind, any other things, new roles that have been having to pull out of nowhere to try and cope with the demand. But it's all of it's unforeseen. So it's required organisations to rapidly and effectively increase resources, train staff to make sure service delivery happens. The ability to scale up quickly, smoothly, productively, and then sometimes scale back down again is really important to make sure that these scarce resources are used with maximum impact. So the need for adequate surge capacity planning can be difficult to anticipate and can be affected by a lot of factors. We are hoping this webinar with our panel of experts who very kindly agreed to join us today are going to discuss the root causes, what measures the public sector can put in place, and how an outcome-based model of procurement can empower the public sector to be agile through the surges in demand that we've got. Just a couple of introductions now. So my name's Kieran Gray. I'm a Client Solutions Director from Bloom Procurement Services. I'm the chair, so I will be not the expert, just the person asking the questions. If I could ask the panelists, so Abby, could you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Abby Lindsay. I'm the head of Central Government and Blue Light here at Bloom Procurement Services. I've been with Bloom for about 2.5 years now, but prior to working at Bloom, I worked in the public sector for 18 years. So my background is very much public sector procurement. And my team here at Bloom look after any new and also existing customers within the central government and blue light sector.
Richard?
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Rich Page. I'm the head of consulting advisory services at BMT. BMT is a global company, and if you ever wish to look at it, go to the website. We do lots of things, but in terms of perhaps for this session, our offers centre around business transformation, digital transformation, and therefore enabling people to get support. To deliver the changes that you wish to deliver. We work across predominantly defence, security and government sector markets and their related industries.
Thanks, Rich. Joe?
Hi, everyone. Joe McGarry. I'm a partner at Morehouse, where I lead our work across government and public services, as well as sustainability and social value. Spent the last 19 years leading or delivering portfolio programme change management services, as well as operating model design support in both public and private sectors. So I've worked across most types of commercial model for consulting services, including surge capacity. Really pleased to be here today, looking forward to sharing some reflections on what works, what doesn't work, but also keen to learn from others on the call. Thank you.
Cheers, Joe. Thank you. Victoria?
Hey all, and thanks to Bloom colleagues for the invite today. So Victoria Evans, I am from EY. I sit in our local public services team, so director at EY. Currently lead a lot of the work that we do in the London region with local public services. So that's everything at the kind of devolved authority level, whether that's local policing, local government or housing. More recently, I've actually spent a significant period of time in central government department delivering a surge contract and leading a team there, working with localities across the country in their COVID response. So that's me.
Great, Victoria, thank you. And last but not least, Edmund.
Sure. Hi, Edmund George. I'm a senior data scientist at PA Consulting. I lead projects in the public services space around data science transformation. How do you change business as usual with smart data science, AI-led concepts? And most recently, I delivered a piece of work with government that was very much in the thick of the response to COVID and surge resourcing, and delivering a new analytics capability that would help respond to that in a smart way and absorb lots and lots of data. So I very much lean on my experience there and my sort of broader knowledge as a data scientist for the data-led side of the conversation.
Brilliant, thank you, Edmund. I hope everyone will agree that this is a very good group of experts on the subject who will really be able to provide some context for what we're going to discuss today. I gave a brief introduction before. I'm not going to go into too much more detail, but So the need to onboard staff quickly, it creates liability risks for the department or the organisation if the staff aren't fit for purpose. So it's important that the body ensure the additional resources source makes sense, they're accredited, they're regulated, and that they remain so throughout the duration of the requirement. There's a lot of things to focus on today. So rather than me going on a bit more, I'd like the panelists to potentially set the scene with sort of what does surge capacity mean to you? And can I go to you first, please, Abby?
Yeah, no problem. So for me, surge capacity is having a strategy in place so that your organisation can react quickly to demands on resources. Conversely, surge capacity also allows you to kind of stand down resource just as quickly when that demand reduces. So an example of when surge capacity strategy would be required is for, I mean, we've already mentioned it on the webinar, is COVID response. So, obviously that was unforeseen, didn't know that, unforeseen, but also about what kind of response and resources would be required there, and to that extent today we're still in that position. So that is a very relevant example. Another example is the likes of Brexit. So some organisations required some surge capacity in terms of a Brexit response. So I guess in a nutshell, it's the means to allow government organisations to draw down on resources and or expertise that you may not have available within your existing workforce. So to draw down as and when required within a kind of a very rapid timescale. That's kind of what surge capacity means to me.
Victoria, can I go to you next, please?
Yeah, sure. I guess I think Abby's spot on there. Kind of at the risk of stating the obvious, in a really simple way, it's about providing the right capability and the right capacity to support those public sector organisations that we work with to rapidly respond to a problem that they're trying to solve and be really flexible to those needs as a situation evolves. So really kind of challenging ourselves to make sure, okay, we brought in this capability and capacity at this point in time, but actually is that still needed as an enduring capability and capacity, and how do you build that capability with the organisation that you're working with? I think there's a difference across government in how surge capacity is referred to. So for example, and speaking from recent experience, I think there's a clear difference between central and local government, for argument's sake, whereby large central government departments will call it call surge a mixture of capability and capacity. Local and devolved government probably not necessarily calling it surge, but more about needing very specific point support because of the fact that their resources are now being redirected to deliver the frontline response. So I think kind of as an organisation, thinking about how you respond to surge in whichever form it's asked is really important, and how you shape that response to a client.
Brilliant. That's great. Thanks, Victoria. Joe, I'll go to you, please.
Yeah, so similar to the others, really. I think it's an effective way to address spikes in demand, but it's for capacity and or capability. And I think the capability side often gets sort of forgotten about. And I think really it's in the context of you don't have the in-house resources to do it yourselves, and it either doesn't make sense to build it in-house. You don't want that permanent capability that with the ongoing costs attributed to it, or you need that resource sooner than you can build it. And so there are sort of two sort of use cases we often see in that context.
Brilliant. Thanks, Joe. Richard?
So you dropped out there, is it? Right. It's
you, Rich.
Cool. So what I'm not going to do is repeat everything that my colleagues have said, because absolutely, I support everything they said. And actually, I think I'll add a different dimension to this. Is what does it mean to me, other than what's been talked about? It's not just about resources. I think actually, from somebody who's got experience of being on what I'll call both sides of the fence, having and I deliberately left out because it allows me to mention it at this particular point. I served on the customer side 20 years in the military, where actually surge. And I agree with Joe, search capability and capacity was actually what my day job was, because that's actually what the day job was in that military, in that sort of responsive bit. But I think so lots of experience doing that, and lots of experience actually doing that on the supplier side. I think there's two things to make a point here. It's actually an ability to surge, i.e. you as a customer, your ability to surge, and do you have not just the commercial models, but the appetite, the desire, and be able to deliver that surge capability and actually act as a socket for it, and what you need to do. So that's what I'm particularly interested in helping clients understand, not that fact that you're then rapidly putting resources perhaps through at the right time in the right place, but actually being able to understand what you have to do as a customer to be able to actually receive this surge of resources, because it is a substantial amount of stuff that has to go on in the background, and magic wands, and one of my specialities is like waving magic wands to help make it happen, but I have to do that with the clients early upstream. And I think the other thing is surge capacity doesn't mean rapid all the time. So yes, I can understand, with what's gone on with COVID and that, and actually sometimes with what's happened with Brexit, about that rapid bringing in of extra support. Actually, depending on what your strategic objectives are and how long or over time they are in terms of any forms of change that you are doing or any support that you need, actually planning surge capacity and when you may need it in 6 months' time, when you need it in a year's time, when you are actually delivering some of these big substantial changes, those big substantial projects, actually that's hugely important, and actually getting out of crisis. So surge, yes, in terms of that rapid, which we've talked about, but actually I'm particularly more introduced in the longer term ability to surge and what that looks like and how you go about it, because actually you can get a lot more value by not having lots and lots of people turn up. It's more about how you then, the model that you put in that and that partnering arrangement, and I'll come on to that more, but probably just to move the conversation away from what we've just talked about. I just introduced that as some thoughts I'm happy to discuss offline with anybody, any particular points on that. Having delivered it a lot in both defence and security, supporting our customers doing exactly those varied models. Thank you.
Thanks, Rich. Edmund, I'll be interested to hear what you've got to say in a quite a different role to everybody else, because
yeah, sure.
It'll be interesting to hear that. Thanks.
Yeah, so I want to echo the thoughts around capacity and capability. Of course, the capability lens that I apply is very much around the information flows and knowing what's going on that drive coordination and being able to do more with less. And so from a technological standpoint, the team that I established and set up in the thick of the surge response within government had to deal with also tactical needs versus strategic needs. What is it that we needed to know when, and who did that need to go to? And so I echo sort of Victoria's comment around, well, distinguishing between, well, there's central, there's local government, there's cross-government, who needs to know what where, and how do you make sure that those flows don't get entangled? So as you're all trying to respond to this this crisis, you're not like you're not just agglomerating around the same spots, and you're not tripping up over each other, fighting over resources, doubling up on effort, and so on. I think that that intelligence layer really came to the fore when I was leading that piece of work. There is that make versus buy concept of, well, do you have some of the skills in-house to really deploy some of those and build some of these tools on the fly? Very much I was in circumstances where it felt like you were trying to fly a plane while trying to build it at the same time, and trying to make sure that you're almost responding to things as of yesterday, and you're thinking, well, actually, if I had to do this again, if we had to plan for the future, what would we want to have in place now, and what does it take for us to get there? And each part of government, each organization will have their own view on what do we have the appetite to build in now so that we can deploy it quickly versus getting it elsewhere, perhaps from the private market, and just having an eye on being able to provide that as well. The last thing that I'll say is on complexity as well. And so the common reference here is COVID, but there are lots of other things going on alongside COVID as well. We were exiting from the EU, there were local economic impacts. COVID was impacting health services and emergency services and so on. And so with all the myriad of information, the question of how do you respond on surge is always changing, and you've always got to keep up to date with that. So I'll leave that there, but I'm happy to expand on any of those points later in the session.
Thanks, Edmund. I think the last two, Rich and Edmund, talking about the importance of the information being available as well, is we don't want to sort of be pushing people towards just I need resource quickly. It's about understanding why and when you need it. On that, I think I know a lot of departments will have a surge capacity plan, but it's probably from 1997. So, I mean, why is it important that the public sector ensure they do have that up-to-date surge capacity plan in place? Victoria, can I go to you for that one, please?
Sure. So I think Rich was spot on in saying this, given the nature of challenges and the changes that government more broadly have had to deal with over the last 5 years, such as the small matter of a global pandemic, but also the related economic, the educational crises that have all come out of the back of the pandemic, through to climate change and the record number of natural disasters we've seen. Surge capacity and planning for all of that has become, or at least it should become, the new normal. And I think a really great example of where we've seen this is, or personally seen this, is with a number of local government organisations moving into what they refer to as cell structures. So basically organising themselves around a common outcome that they're trying to drive towards. It was really effective at the local level because it kind of stopped that cross kind of the silo working almost across individual departments, and actually just corralling around a common theme that they were trying to get to deliver the outcome. It was really effective in coping with that surge type demand then, as it created clarity on the priorities, it created clarity around the outputs that were needed for everyone involved, and it was really important to retain that focus and keep refreshing that level of focus. And I've seen some great examples of that in local government, as I said. But then that also then gives you a sense of, well, okay, if we are going to respond and organise in this way, where do we need support and surge capacity to focus on kind of just keeping the lights on, while we're all focused on putting out the kind of fire over there? How do we kind of deliver business as usual, because people will still need services? So I think that's really important.
Brilliant.
Local government.
Yeah, thanks, Victoria, much appreciated. Edmund, can I get your view on that one, please?
Sure. I think we've seen the pace at which the demand that's been the sudden demand caused by recent pandemic has really outstripped just the ability to respond, or strained the ability to respond as well. So those up-to-date capacity plans are a real must. But then also there's recognizing that more people doesn't necessarily solve the problem. And so we were certainly in the environment that I worked in, that was very much the case. Lots of activity going on, but lots of streamlining also needed, which we worked with the client organization to do as well. So understanding where are you going to burst at the seams, and then what's the alternative answer to more people as well. Aside from departmental capacity planning, cross-governmental capacity planning is also required. Who borrows what from where? How are they used? What are the roles in the circumstance as well? I certainly saw there were instances, just because it was a new situation, where certain government departments get absolutely bombarded with requests for information they've provided once, and that streamlining of, once the information has been passed on, it's available here, and it's transformed in this way, and it's enriched in this way, and this is the next phase as well. And so making sure that we're being efficient in how we're trying to stay on top as well. The last thing that I'll talk about is also in and amongst departmental workings, also data sharing as well. There are clear reasons for why we segment and have hard boundaries around information and data, but in some cases that data can be difficult to share in the moment because the policies weren't designed for pandemic response. And so having data that's ready to go, that you can sign off and say, yes, I'm ready to share it with this department at a moment's notice, I think it also requires some thought too.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Matthew. I really appreciate that. So we just talked about the importance of having a plan. So I want to sort of move on to, well, what do you need to consider when you're making that plan? So when the public sector is assessing their team's capacity and planning, what sort of resources are required to deliver the pipeline of projects? Joe, can I go to you first with that, please?
Yeah, absolutely. And this sort of leads on quite nicely from the points Edmund was making. So I think first and foremost, to assess your capacity and resource requirements across a pipeline of projects, it's really important to have that portfolio management capability or equivalent. So it's the function that can sit across the portfolio. It operates in the best interests of the organisation to create that single view, and from there you can then optimise demand and capacity. So I think that's an enabler, and then it's about having that really clear roadmap of change and sufficient detail in your project plans that you can actually identify the capacity and capability needed to deliver, and then understand those gaps in skill sets at an aggregate sort of portfolio view. And then really from there, it's considering that sort of build versus buy decision or choice, where you can decide which capabilities should you be developing in-house versus what would be more cost effective or simply more realistic to buy in from the market through an appropriate arrangement, such as a surge capacity call-off arrangement.
Brilliant, thanks, Joe. Rich, do you want to follow on from that, please?
Yeah, thank you very much. And I will follow on from that. I absolutely agree fully with everything Joe said. I think the follow on add to that, and my advice would be, is engage the market early. So I would suggest within your resilience planning and within your contingency planning anyway, that actually be regularly talking to industry and to the market, understanding, because ultimately the people, the outputs, or whatever the commercial model is, and if it is going to come from a supply base, particularly when you're dealing with what's going on with COVID, we're reaching into the same supply base that you're probably recruiting from. And so actually understanding the ability for the supply base to respond and for them to also plan. So, and I'm sure I'm not speaking for my colleagues, but we daily contingency plan to support our customers, because the world is ever changing in terms of our own people, in our own growth plans and our own supply chains, and we're on it daily. Or upstream engagement, and actually it's not just the upstream to start with, but actually regular engagements like this, but just regular engagements with communities of interest, with suppliers and with customers. Having these conversations actually means that if there is another crisis that comes over the hill, and actually that surge capability that you've been planning, as I talked about earlier, that actually it's a longer term, with your portfolio plans and all the rest of it, that you're going to need resources in 6 months' time because you're delivering this particular project. But then if something comes out of the air, actually you've been engaging with the market already, and sort of you understand what is available for you to reach into. So I think that's the first thing, and I think the other one is also flexibility of commercial model. So not only understanding what you can get, and because you're having those regular conversations, but how you're going to get it. And I'm not saying there has to be lots of frameworks and all the rest of it. I'm not advocating. What I'm advocating is understand your route and understand what's the model for this scenario. Do you want time and materials, lots of people to pile in to do what you need to do? You're happy to take more of the risk yourselves and a T&M model, or actually you also want a more discrete agile model, which can do T&M if it's crisis, need people in within 3 or 4 or 5 days, but also to deal with you more once you get out of crisis into more either recovery or actually into more business as usual, how you will then buy that supply and that resource in. So that's my advice: planning, and talk. And so therefore we can then mitigate and deal with the challenges that you have, and we can help you do that.
Brilliant. Thanks, Rich. Thanks, Joe, as well. Sort of moving on now to maybe something to discuss other than COVID. I think COVID's dominated everything to do with any kind of surge capacity over the last one, but Rich raised some good points there about there are other things we need to think about. So in your roles as the people who would be contacted for this, what particular occurrences led you to having more in-depth conversations specifically about surge capacity? So not just additional resource, but actually got onto that conversation about surge capacity. Victoria, can I go to you first with that one, please?
Yeah. So I think I'll try and not make it about COVID. It's really hard when you've been absorbed in it for so long. But I think the important thing is the unforeseen areas of additive demand on top of the fundamental problem that you're being faced with. So for example, if I think of an organisation, a central government organisation I've been working with, it was around that interface between the department and other central government departments, and then local authorities, and between local authorities and their local partners, their local businesses, their voluntary and community sector organisations. So I guess what I'm saying is this was almost unseen demand that if it isn't dealt with properly, it creates exponential failure demand in the system, meaning that you then have to load more resource in to direct dealing with that failure demand rather than solving the ultimate problem that you was being asked to solve, if that makes sense. Yeah. And I think Edmund made a really good point on that actually it isn't about more people, more bodies coming in to respond to it, but it's about looking at like what is the problem we're trying to solve and actually what's the best way to organise around that, because there can be in times of crisis a tendency to just throw more people and get more people solving the problem solving around something, which actually just creates duplication and inefficiency of decision making. That's one thing I've tried to keep loosely connected to.
Yeah, it's sometimes difficult to find something else to talk about. Rich?
I won't talk about it, COVID. So we currently, and also our engagement with other customers, provide what is called surge capability, but over a longer period of time, which isn't necessarily in response to a strategic shock, national strategic shock, or crisis. It's surge capacity in its what I call its truest business as usual sense, where an organisation is wishing to do some form of transformation, it's change, achieve some strategic objectives, and has a change portfolio, which we help them with to deliver in 1 year, 6 months, 2 years, 3, 4, 5, 10 years, up to 10 years time. And actually we have longevity of contracts up to 10 years to actually work in a partnering arrangement with those customers to actually give them the space and give them the support to actually achieve their strategic objectives within a viable commercial model. So which is therefore not necessarily related to COVID, but COVID does impact on it. And so from my perspective, real world is you can do it over a long period of time, and actually it's about value add. And when you've got crisis, you want to get people in. Yes, value is important, but actually when you're looking at these things longer term, it's about, Joe talked about it earlier in terms of social value. It's what we can help brings to the party for you as customers who are trying to achieve your longer term goals, and rather than you making it all yourself, that actually you buy in what you need, i.e., and there's an example here where you may establish a capability and a capacity to deal with this size of number of projects, programs, or anything else, and actually if you need more than that, that's when you'll come to industry to support. So you have a business as usual capability to help you to deliver what you need to deliver. But we all know, sometimes that you need to surge, projects need to be advanced or whatever else. And so actually you then have that ability to reach out to a partner who's helping you do this, working with you and supporting you, adding the value that you need to work. And so the trust is built. It's about relationships, and it's about seamlessly working together, and also de-risking some of the issues and sharing that burden and that risk. So I suppose that's a bit I would go. We tend to have a lot of conversations about that type of scenario with our customer base. Yes, there is the rapid response piece as well, but we're very much of wanting to talk. Well, actually, if you set yourselves up long term with partners or number of partners, and actually your ability to deal with crises probably, while difficult, may be less of a challenge, even though obviously we understand it is a challenge.
Brilliant, thank you, Rich. I'm going to ask for a little bit of prognostication now from the panelists. We all know, obviously, that again, COVID has been the risk, but what's next? What are the risks that the central government and local government need to be aware of over the next 12, 24, 36 months, even further into the future? Joe, can I go to you first, please?
Yeah, thanks, Kieran. I mean, this is a really live conversation for all organisations at the moment, and I think we're working through this ourselves at Morehouse. We're also supporting clients with programs like workplace transformation, smarter working, hybrid ways of working. Everyone's sort of grappling with, we are in the new normal, but the new normal is going to continue to evolve. So there are a couple of risks I think it's worth considering. The first one is not losing human connectedness. I think, working remotely 100% of the time, it does constrain our ability for sort of social interaction. And this is going to impact organizational culture, and it's going to require sort of conscious thought about how you're going to continue to inspire and motivate your workforce, and not just your staff, but also your suppliers who you've got working in things like surge models. And then how do you foster the right values and behaviors while we're all slightly less connected through laptop screens? So I think for surge capacity arrangements, that makes the onboarding of new resources really important. You've got to get that right, otherwise you set yourself up to fail. And I think following on from that, how do you integrate your teams to ensure they're working seamlessly together whilst everyone is probably sat at home? So some real challenges to work through there. The second one, and it's to a point Rich made earlier, it's about remaining flexible in the model you're putting in place. And as these new hybrid working models evolve, how do you bake that into your contracts and your commercial construct? So, we've surveyed everyone in our firm. I've seen similar surveys from a number of client organizations. The majority of people will seem to have a preference for returning 2 to 3 days a week to the office, and then the other 3 or 2 days working from home. However, there are still a minority of people who want to remain 100% remote, whether they might be clinically vulnerable. And equally, there are those that want to come back full time. So I think the real challenge is, how do you establish a new model that meets all these different needs and is a model that is inclusive and enables everyone to contribute effectively? And then I think the same goes for how you then contract with your suppliers to set expectations, but also ensure that flexibility as you progress and your model evolves.
Thanks, Joe. Victoria, could you? Just have to go Victoria.
Sure. So I won't kind of repeat anything Joe's just said, because I absolutely agree with a number of those key challenges that you've just set out. And all of those challenges that are going to be facing organisations, not to mention the ones we haven't picked up on yet. So the pandemic was a surprise to a few of us, I think. But I guess what I'll focus on is the risks and the two sides to the risk going on that in terms of clients, so organisations buying in professional services, and also those professional services organisations. And I think from what I've seen over the last 18 months, 15 months or so, is the kind of some of the amazing things that have been achieved have required real pace and energy to kind of respond and adapt to that. And the public sector has been incredible in doing that. So we've seen new organisations stand up. We've seen new technology in place that didn't exist. We've seen new supply chains kind of being established that weren't there before. We've seen, new businesses pop up. So we've seen some amazing innovation and rapid decision making. But I think there's also a kind of a slight trade-off to that pace, which is, one, you kind of trading off on perspective, and there comes a point where there isn't a need to continue at that same level of pace, and sometimes the level of pace can become a bit counterintuitive. So organisations need to think that through in terms of the decisions that they're making around surge demand and capacity demand. And I think also the other element of the pace angle and risk is around that sets a culture for the organisation and a tone for the organisation. Sometimes it can be really difficult when you've got lots of organisations working together, pulling together towards a common goal. Actually, how do you start to establish a culture of what you want this entity to look like in the medium to longer term? So that's kind of two bits from a client perspective. I think the other bit from a client perspective is really not building that dependency on consultants and using consultants in the way that consultants should be used. So focusing on the resources that could arguably start to become BAU is bad for customer, but also bad for us as suppliers. And it's a slight cliche, but it's true. And I guess the consequences of that from our types of organisations and professional services organisations, the three kind of key risks that I've been focused on over the last 6 months particularly is reputational risk for professional services organisations. We're really challenging ourselves to make sure that we are supporting our clients to do the right thing, and where we can be comfortable when the public scrutiny comes in that we did the right thing by serving our clients in the right way. I think there's a commercial risk around this, so making sure we're striking up the right commercial relationships that delivers more value than is being spent on organisations, and also really gives the right level of assurance. As we know, to the earlier point I made around pace, actually it can be really challenging to put the level of kind of QA that you want within those client deliverables or that client support, because you're operating in such a flexible and agile way. So I think that's something to be cognizant of. And then the kind of final risk I'll point towards, which is to all organisations, is the real people risk. So Joe touched on the point around that human connectivity, but I also think the sustainability of our people and the well-being, who've been operating in really challenging environments, that becomes quite a challenge in the near term if we don't keep an eye on that quite closely and building those teams.
Thank you, Victoria. Rich?
Gives me something. I've just been thinking about how to add something new to what Joe and Victoria talked about, because actually I agree with everything they've said. I think the angle I would come at in terms of risk is reliance on technology. I've quite clearly seen how public sector and supply chain and ourselves as customer services oriented companies, there's a huge reliance on technology. Here's a perfect example today in a Zoom call. And what do you do if that goes down? And I'm not going to go into anything on here, but you can agree between the lines. What I'm saying is, one, if that ability to communicate for us to progress and to do stuff, and that is predominantly more enabled by technology, well, the risks are that becomes your weak spot, and therefore cybersecurity and how you protect yourselves as clients becomes even more. We do it as well. It's not just about a public. You could take the word public organisation, the word public out of this question. All organisations. To me, it's exactly the same thing. We've talked about people. We've talked about a number of other things on this particular one. But actually, how do you protect yourselves when you're relying more on technology to enable you to do your business, and therefore actually the focus on cyber protection and actually reversionary modes to be able to go, what happens if things go down? What do we do? Those are the real big risks, because they will affect your ability to deliver your outcomes that you have set yourselves within a customer. I think most people get that, to be perfectly honest, but actually I thought I'd just call it out on this particular call as a food for thought. I think the only other thing I will add on, and it's sort of wave tops in some respects, what Joe and Victoria are talking about, but I actually think there's something about mindset here. I think as human beings, our mindsets, I don't think they've fully changed yet, because I'm sure, I know I talk internally with our company, I talk with our partners, and I'm sure, and I talk with our customers, is people have, though hopefully they're getting out, have seen COVID as just a thing that's got in the way for a year or two, and want to go back to how they worked before. And it's about how we, and that is a very real risk in terms of, in dealing with our workforces. And bringing them on this journey and helping those who have struggled with isolation and well-being and all those sort of things. And actually, if this is, I'm sure there's many customers as well suppliers that suddenly don't have as many buildings anymore. Well, they're going to use buildings for collaboration. You don't need all these offices to people go sit in a floor plate. It's in how you take the opportunities, which is my final point. All the risks we've talked about today, all arguably you could flip and see as opportunities, and therefore looking at those risks and then looking at those opportunities. What does this adjusted way of working, reliance on technology, coming together for collaborative reasons only, reducing travel. Well, what are the opportunities here? Other than the obvious, you save money on buildings or whatever else. And there are, I'm sure, many varied ones, and I'll be here all day talking about them, so I'll pause there.
Thanks, Rich. Much appreciated. Edmund, same question, please.
Great. I'm going to be very slim in my response on this because so many good things have been said so far. Where I'll come in is just keeping on top of what's changing and knowing how many things that matter to you are changing at once, and having that agility in the business model to say, well, actually, now is a real trigger point for now moving to a slightly different way of working. And I think there were points which were addressed around agility, and not what that means for an organization, but also what it means for people as well.
Brilliant. Thank you, Edmund. Very much appreciated. Just want to move on to something a little bit more. Everyone's talked about procuring different types of services and people and things like that. We're obviously here with an outcome-based sort of procurement thing to talk about. It's one of the things we've got anyway. So I just wanted to ask how an outcomes-based model supporting public sector organisations to remain agile. How can it do that in unforeseen circumstances? And if I could go to you first, please, Joe. How can outcomes-based help?
Great, thanks. I mean, obviously, there's a clear benefit of linking spend directly to outcomes that drive business performance, and I think the trick is getting the balance between a clear view of that outcome, but also an understanding of the approach and the work plan required to deliver that, and then how flexibility can be built into that approach and work plan and the associated contracts to respond to those sort of unforeseen requirements. For it might be a change in scope, a change in scale, a change in pace. So you know, in terms of an example, we're currently providing like a managed PMO service for a central government department against a set of agreed outcomes and KPIs. What we've agreed with them, we've built the flexibility into that contract management process that actually allows us to tailor the statement of work on a monthly cycle, because we knew we wouldn't know what's in our statement of work in 9 months' time. So we've built that flexibility in the statement of work, and it's a mixture of services and deliverables. So we can provide one-off deliverables or role-based support through the call-off arrangement against a pre-agreed rate card that was also in the contract. So I think building that flexibility into your contracts is really important, even if you're overall aiming for a particular outcome, but it gives you that additional flexibility without having to go back out to market for a different requirement.
Thanks, Joe. Much appreciate it. Rich, could I go to you for the same question, please?
Sure. So I'll just add on to Joe there. I think in some respects I'd challenge the question, not to challenge Bloom, but to challenge this whole point about an output-based model. I think ultimately, to me, it's about having the right model that is going to deliver for you as customers over short, medium, and long term. And that model doesn't have to be one size fits all. It doesn't have to be outcomes based. It can be. You could talk about partnering models. You could talk about contingency resource models. I think it's about. It's ironically, because the word is in the question about agility of mind, and it's sort of probably my common theme that I'll comment when we come to closing remarks is there is no one size fits all. Yes, people like outcomes based because it's about shared risk and all the other value bits that go into it. But actually, you can get more value in some respects if you look at it in a slightly wider context in terms of partnering, and they're not necessarily as complex. And actually, you can have a more of a strategic level outcome-based model if you want to use that. But actually, how you then work within it doesn't have to be outcome-based. But actually, it can be also risk-reward based. It can be all sorts of different ways. It can incentive-based. It can rebates. It can do invest in social value-based, and all these things you can do. They're all there. But it's actually ultimately though, it comes down to what you as a customer want to achieve, and working with the supply chain to support you to do that. It comes back to what Victoria is saying: is that you're not basing your future and your surge on the rudimentary fixed in what the supply chain can give you. Is how we can complement and support you at the right times, the right place, with the right people and the right capabilities to deliver what you need to deliver. So I've sort of swerved the question a little bit, but I'm deliberately doing that to just say, there are there are so many different ways of doing this, but every organization is different. Everybody's outputs and outcomes and benefits they want to achieve are different. And actually, the key is working, as I talked about earlier, working with the market and the supply chain early and regularly, so we can help shape and support you where you want to go. And then, you know, you can put a model in place for two minutes, or you can put it in for 2 years. I mean, whatever works and scratches the itch, really. And you can change it, and that's the other thing. You know, if you work that in, you can change it. It's work, you know, things work at a certain time and place, and it was great. You've either evolved, you've changed, you need a different model. That's fine. Change and come up with a different model, because ultimately the environment's changing outside, and you need to keep one eye on that, and therefore you need to involve the way you respond to that, both as how you will do anyway as your customers with your contingency planning, but also we as suppliers have to evolve to that as well to support your evolving needs. Yeah,
no, I agree with that, and I know it's a Bloom call, but I understand the need for a different type of procurement is really prevalent for everybody in different times. On that, Abby, can I come to you sort of to give a Bloom view on how outcomes-based is suitable in a lot of occasions? Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I mean, you know, everything that the panelists have just said, completely agree with, so I won't repeat any of that. But I guess from a Bloom perspective and how Bloom can support. So, you know, an outcomes-based model means you just essentially pay for what's being delivered. Therefore, from a cost perspective, it allows the public sector to really keep control of the cost element within the project, rather than working on a T&M basis and potentially cost spiraling out of control. You know, we can really work with the customer and the supplier to develop the milestones, create some milestones, and monitor them throughout the project delivery period to ensure, you know, the key thing is completion to use the customer's satisfaction, and at which point then the supplier is then paid. And then just talking about kind of from a, you know, remaining flexible in terms of change, because with this type of surge capacity, it does change. So, you know, we offer a very kind of simple change control facility, and touching on, I think, Joe, you mentioned about working with the central government department and having a monthly review in terms of what that statement of work will look like going forward. So we work a similar process with the central government department, where it's kind of a sprint that is reviewed, if needed be, on a monthly basis, and where change is needed, we would then change that, you know, sign off that change control as and when is required. So I guess that's kind of from a Bloom perspective where we believe that an outcomes-based model would work for you.
It is, and it's that agility that we like to focus on at Bloom, the ability to be able to jump between different ways of working and different contracts, stretching things out, making things smaller and starting again. But again, back to what Rich says, this webinar is not just about Bloom, it's about how surge capacity can be managed across the whole of central government, and there are options out there, and we are just one of them, and outcomes-based is just one of them. So now, almost like a little bit of freestyling, I want to go on to closing remarks. Anything we've discussed on the webinar so far, or anything new you want to raise? Rich, you first, please, if that's okay.
Sure. So just to really wrap up everything I've been talking about is there is no one size fits all. Early engagement, both for ourselves is advantageous, but hopefully you would find for yourselves as customers advantageous. Let's talk. You know, and then looking at developing and shaping what you need, and helping you design the surge model that you need, whether it's a short term or a long term, and helping you also, I think the two key points is be in a position to accept a surge whenever it's to happen, and also that you have the confidence and the trust in the supply chain to deliver the surge when you want it. And actually it all comes down to relationship management and commercial models, and not being really fixed, having that agility of mind, which, you know, I think in this day and age we've all got, really. And yeah, and that's really it. And what I'm saying tomorrow will change in 2 weeks' time, and change in a month's time, because that's the nature of the environment we're working in, and we have to adapt to whatever we see out there. Thank you.
Thanks, Rich, much appreciated. Joe?
Thanks. Yeah, it's actually similar to Rich. I think it's really important that you invest the time up front working with your commercial colleagues, working with partners like Bloom, and then test the market with suppliers like the panelists here today. I think that you get so much more value by doing that pre-procurement, because once you're in a procurement process, it's a lot more locked down, and it's difficult to flex if you feel your requirement changes. So that early investment upfront with your teams and your partners, and test the market, so you shape the model in the right way before you go out to formal procurement. I think that's hugely beneficial for organisations.
Brilliant, thanks, Joe. Victoria?
Yeah, I think so. More of just a reflection, really, from me, rather than repeating anything that's been said. The conversation around outcomes-based model was fascinating, and from my perspective is really positive for the sector, because I think outcomes-based contracting is definitely, in my view, not a distinction from a partnership. I think to deliver outcomes, you've got to operate in partnership. And I think sometimes people get a bit confused around what we mean by an outcomes-based model. They see it as being a contingent arrangement. I personally see it as a client defines an outcome they want to achieve. We agree what is a mutually, acceptable commercial relationship to deliver that value. And I think integral to all of that is making sure you operate as a partnership, so it truly drives the right behaviours, and having the governance in place and the relationship management to drive that. So I think that was just more of a reflection, and then also just great to have a range of voices on the panel who are obviously doing some really interesting work. So thanks for having me.
Brilliant, thanks, Victoria. Edmund?
Sure, I would just be echoing the points around early investment, and if you've got questions and concerns about your organisation, work to address them now. It's the value of acting quickly has been demonstrated over the past several months.
Perfect, thanks, Edmund. Abby?
Yeah, I think just lastly to say, it's been a really interesting conversation. We can, just echoing what the other panelists there said, communication is key, really, and really kind of talking to us early on. We can facilitate that early market engagement, which we have done. So we work with a range of key partners who are on the call today, but also with our other supply chain partners, and we can really kind of facilitate that early market engagement and going to the market to kind of to kind of work with creating statements of work, milestones and outcomes. But I think also, we can. Joe mentioned about once you're kind of locked into a procurement process, it's quite rigid, whereas using the NEPRO 3 framework, Bloom can really help in terms of navigating through that. So we take away some of the kind of the red tape that allows you to have those conversations with the supply chain that you wouldn't necessarily be able to have once you've started a kind of a procurement process. So yeah, talk to us. We're doing this on a regular basis, and yeah, the door's always open.
Lovely, thanks. I bet we've probably got time for one of the questions that was kindly submitted by the audience. So I'll just do it quick. So the question was, what is your view on consultancy support as a surge capacity route? Victoria, can I just throw that one to you, please?
Yeah, of course you can. I think there's something about distinguishing between capability and capacity, and I think a number of the panelists have reflected on that. So where it is a pure capacity play because we just need bodies to help us deliver something, I think for organisations such as ourselves and the buyer of those services, we really need to focus on a transition back to government, and focusing on how we leave the organisation in a better place than when we started. So actually, yes, we can deliver those services, but it needs to be a transition quickly and sustainably. I think the second point is where it's capability, we really should recognise this. It's not helpful, that said, sometimes all gets badged as consultants filling civil servant roles or public sector roles, because much of what we have seen done to date in those surge roles, it's new, it requires innovation, it requires resilience, it requires tenacity, and it requires a single focus and an ability to work across a range of cultures. So they're my key points on capacity.
Brilliant. Thanks, Victoria. And just before I throw this last one to the last question to Rich, just want to say that's what Bloom do. We offer that opportunity to go to whoever you want to speak to, and which of those specific services you need. You're not locked into just a small range. Rich, finally to you, just to answer that question about consultancy support, please.
Yeah, sure. I'll be very, very quick. I agree with everything Victoria said, really. And I think it comes back to everything I've been saying during this about is what you need, and use the right route. Bloom offer you a route for that output base that we've talked about in order to do it. That might not be what you need. And there are other routes out there, and there are other ways of dealing with it. I think we have to be clear on what you mean by consultancy support. And the only thing I will say, and I know I think Joe, and I'm not sure the others, we've been involved in the, though I know representatives from their companies have been involved in the Government Consulting Hub's playbook for consultancy support. So I would encourage you to go to that. It's part of the new procurement playbook, and we've been involved, they've involved industry in crafting the consulting playbook, and therefore using the right routes and the right suppliers, because supplier base is huge, to get what you need. And there are many routes, and Bloom obviously provides a really good, healthy, successful route, but there are other ones as well. And I'm being frank, and comes back to know what you need, and be clear on what you understand as what consultancy support means, because consultancy support to one body, some people is partnering outcome based, and to others it's contingent labour. So I just be very clear on what you're looking for, call it what you like, and then know where to go.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you very much, Rich. I think it's probably about time to close it down today. If you'd like to discuss anything more in any future detail with anyone, by all means, get in touch. We can sort of hand out details. A copy of the webinar will be sent to everybody who booked. And I just want to really thank all the panelists for your time today. I really enjoyed the session. I think I've learned quite a lot. And hopefully other people involved have as well. Bloom are there for anything, and same for everybody else who's involved. But thank you very much for your time. I really appreciated it. Sign off now.